Welcome back, peasants of Camelmore. I hope you didn't miss me too much. I am Lord Petty, but of course you know that. And here is Rolfe. Say hello.
Yes, hello! Can we just get to the story already? I've been so scared for little Irene!
All right, Rolfe, calm your worries. So where we left off was all of the goblins had successfully tunneled under the king's palace and had popped up into the king's wine cellar. Meanwhile, little Curdy is still locked up in his room after being shot in the leg by one of the men-at-arms, but hopefully he will be able to help, because none of the men-at-arms believed or listened to anything Curdy said, and all Curdy had to tell them was hints and tips of how to beat the goblins.
Come on, Curdy! Come to the rescue!
Hush. Shh. It's gonna be okay, Rolfe. All right. Chapter 27, titled The Goblins in the King's House. Here we go. When Curdy fell asleep, he began at once to dream. He thought he was ascending the mountainside from the mouth of the mine, whistling and singing, "Ring, dog, bang," when he came upon a woman and child who were lost. And from that point, he went on dreaming all that had happened since he met the princess and Looty. How he had watched the goblins and been taken by them, how he had been rescued by the princess, everything indeed, until he was wounded and imprisoned by the men-at-arms. And now he thought he was lying wide awake where they had laid him, when suddenly he heard a great thundering sound.
"The Cobbs are coming," he said. "They didn't believe a word I told them. The Cobbs will be carrying off the princess from under their stupid noses. But they shan't! That they shan't!"
He jumped up, as he thought, and began to dress, but, to his dismay, found that he was still lying in bed.
"Now then, I will," he said. "Here goes. I am up now."
But yet again, he found himself snug in bed. 20 times he tried, and 20 times he failed. For in fact, he was not awake, only dreaming that he was. Oh, I hate when that happens. At length, in an agony of despair, fancying he heard the goblins all over the house, he gave a great cry. Then there came, as he thought, a hand upon the lock of the door. It opened, and, looking up, he saw a lady with white hair, carrying a silver box in her hand, enter the room. She came to his bed, he thought, stroked his head and face with cool, soft hands, took the dressing from his leg, rubbed it with something that smelled like roses, and then waved her hands over him 3 times. At the last wave of her hands, everything vanished. He felt himself sinking into the profoundest slumber, and remembered nothing more until he awoke in earnest. The setting moon was throwing a feeble light through the casement, and the house was full of uproar. There was soft, heavy, multitudinous stamping, a clashing and clanging of weapons, the voices of men and the cries of women mixed with a hideous bellowing, which sounded victorious. The Cobbs were in the house! He sprang from his bed, hurried on some of his clothes, not forgetting his shoes, which were armed with nails. Then, spying an old hunting knife, or short sword, hanging on the wall, he caught it and rushed down the stairs, guided by the sounds of strife, which grew louder and louder. When he reached the ground floor, he found the whole place swarming. All the goblins of the mountains seemed gathered there. He rushed amongst them, shouting,
1, 2, hitting you! 3, 4, blasted bomb!
And with every rhyme, he came down a great step upon a foot, cutting at the same time at their faces, executing, indeed, a sword dance of the wildest description. Away scattered the goblins in every direction, into closets, upstairs, into chimneys, up on rafters, and down to the cellars. Curdy went on stamping and slashing and singing, but saw nothing of the people of the house until he came to the great hall, in which, the moment he entered it, arose a great goblin shout. The last of the men-at-arms, the captain himself, was on the floor, buried beneath a wallowing crowd of goblins. For while each knight was busy defending himself as well as he could by stabs in the thick bodies of the goblins, for he had soon found their heads all but invulnerable, meaning they were pretty much invincible, The queen had attacked his legs and feet with her horrible granite shoe, and he was soon down. But the captain had got his back to the wall and stood out longer. The goblins would have torn them all to pieces, but the king had given orders to carry them away alive, and over each of them, in 12 groups, was standing a knot of goblins, while as many as could find room were sitting upon their prostrate bodies. Curdie burst in, dancing and gyrating and stamping and singing like a small incarnate whirlwind.
Where 'tis all a hole, sir, never can be holes. Why should their shoes have soles, sir, when they've got no soles? But she's upon her foot, sir, has a granite shoe. The strongest leather boot, sir, 6 would soon be through. Ha!
The queen gave a howl of rage and dismay, and before she recovered her presence of mind, Curdie, having begun with the group nearest him, had 11 of the knights on their legs again.
Step on their feet!
He cried as each man rose, and in a few minutes the hall was nearly empty, the goblins running from it as fast as they could, howling and shrieking and limping and cowering every now and then as they ran to cuddle their wounded feet in their hard hands, or to protect them from the frightful stamp of the armed men. And now Curdie approached the group which, trusting in the queen and her shoe, kept their guard over the prostrate captain. The king sat on the captain's head, but the queen stood in front, like an infuriated cat, with her perpendicular eyes gleaming green, and her hair standing half up from her horrid head. Her heart was quaking, however, and she kept moving about her skin-shod foot with nervous apprehension. When Curdie was within a few paces, she rushed at him, made one tremendous stamp at his opposing foot, which happily he withdrew in time, and caught him round the waist to dash him on the marble floor. But just as she caught him, he came down with all the weight of his iron-shod shoe upon her skin-shod foot, and with a hideous howl, she dropped him, squatted on the floor, and took her foot in both her hands. Meanwhile, the rest rushed on the king, and the bodyguard sent them flying and lifted the prostrate captain, who was all but pressed to death. It was some moments before he recovered breath and consciousness.
Oh, where's the princess?
Cried Curdie again and again. No one knew, and off they all rushed in search of her. Through every room in the house they went, but nowhere was she to be found. Neither was one of the servants to be seen. But Curdie, who had kept to the lower part of the house, which was now quiet enough, began to hear a confused sound, as of a distant hubbub, and set out to find where it came from. The noise grew as his sharp ears guided him to a stair, and so to the wine cellar. It was full of goblins, whom the butler was supplying with wine as fast as he could draw it. While the queen and her party had encountered the men-at-arms, Harelip, with another company, had gone off to search the house. They captured every one they met, and when they could find no more, they hurried away to carry them safe to the caverns below. But when the butler, who was amongst them, found that their path lay through the wine cellar, he bethought himself of persuading them to taste the wine. And, as he had hoped, they no sooner tasted than they wanted more. The routed goblins, on their way below, joined them, and when Curdie entered, they were all with outstretched hands, in which were vessels of every description, from saucepan to silver cup, pressing around the butler, who sat at the tap of a huge cask, filling and filling. Curdie cast one glance around the place before commencing his attack, and saw in the farthest corner a terrified group of the domestics unwatched, but cowering without courage to attempt their escape. Amongst them was the terror-stricken face of Looty, but nowhere could he see the princess. Seized with the horrible conviction that Harelip had already carried her off, he rushed amongst them, unable for wrath to sing any more, but stamping and cutting with greater fury than ever.
Step on their feet! Step on their feet!
He shouted, and in a moment the goblins were disappearing through the hole in the floor like rats and mice. They could not vanish so fast, however, but that many more goblin feet had to go limping back over the underground ways of the mountain that morning. Presently, however, they were reinforced from above by the king and his party, with the redoubtable queen at their head. Finding Curdie again busy amongst her unfortunate subjects, she rushed at him once more with the rage of despair, and this time gave him a bad bruise on the foot. Then a regular stabbing fight got up between them. Curdie, with the point of his hunting knife, keeping her from clasping her mighty arms about him, as he watched his opportunity of getting once more a good stamp at her skin-shod foot. But the queen was more wary as well as more agile than hitherto. Hitherto is just a very fancy old-timey word referring to a time that was referred to before. So in our case, all it means was before. So much more agile than before. The rest, meantime, finding their adversary thus matched for the moment, paused in their headlong hurry and turned to the shivering group of women in the corner, as if determined to emulate his father and have a son-woman of some sort to share his future throne. Harelip rushed at them, caught up Looty, and sped with her to the hole. She gave a great shriek, and Curdie heard her and saw the plight she was in. Gathering all his strength, he gave the queen a sudden cut across the face with his weapon, came down as she started back with all his weight on the proper foot, and sprang to Looty's rescue. The prince had 2 defenseless feet, and on both of them, Curdie stamped just as he reached the hole. He dropped his burden and rolled shrieking into the earth. Curdie made one stab at him as he disappeared, caught hold of the senseless Looty, and having dragged her back to the corner, there mounted guard over her, preparing once more to encounter the queen. Her face streaming with blood, and her eyes flashing green lightning through it. She came on with her mouth open, and her teeth grinning like a tiger's, followed by the king and her bodyguard of the thickest goblins. But the same moment in rushed the captain and his men, and ran at them, stamping furiously. They dared not encounter such an onset. Away they scurried, the queen foremost. Of course, the right thing would have been to take the king and queen prisoners and hold them hostages for the princess, but they were so anxious to find her that no one thought of detaining them until it was too late. Having thus rescued the servants, they set about searching the house once more. None of them could give the least information concerning the princess. Looty was almost silly with terror, and although scarcely able to walk, would not leave Curdie's side for a single moment. Again he allowed the others to search the rest of the house, where, except a dismayed goblin lurking here and there, they found no one, while he requested Looty to take him to the princess's room. She was as submissive and obedient as if he had been the king. He found the bedclothes tossed about, and most of them on the floor, while the princess's garments were scattered all over the room, which was in the greatest confusion. It was only too evident that the goblins had been there, and Curdie had no longer any doubt that she had been carried off at the very first of the inroad. With a pang of despair, he saw how wrong they had been in not securing the king and queen and prince. But he determined to find and rescue the princess, as she had found and rescued him, or meet the worst fate to which the goblins could doom him. And there's chapter 27.
Woo! So they took the princess then?
That's what it looks like, Rolfe.
Ah, no! Curdie was too late!
Whoa, Rolfe, it's all right. Calm down. There's still more chapters in the book. It's not done yet, buddy.
Really?
Yes, really, buddy.
Okay, read the next one.
Okay, here we go. Chapter 28, titled Curdie's Guide. Just as the consolation of this resolve dawned upon his mind, and he was turning away for the cellar to follow the goblins into their hole, something touched his hand. It was the slightest touch, and when he looked, he could see nothing. Feeling and peering about in the gray of the dawn, his fingers came upon a tight thread. He looked again, and narrowly, but still could see nothing. It flashed upon him that this must be the princess's thread, Without saying a word, for he knew no one would believe him any more than he had believed the princess, he followed the thread with his finger, contrived to give Looty the slip, and was soon out of the house, and on the mountainside, surprised that, if the thread were indeed her grandmother's messenger, it should have led the princess, as he supposed it must, into the mountain, where she would be certain to meet the goblins rushing back enraged from their defeat. But he hurried on in the hope of overtaking her first. When he arrived, however, at the place where the path turned off for the mine, he found that the thread did not turn with it, but went straight up the mountain. Could it be that the thread was leading him home to his mother's cottage? Could the princess be there? He bounded up the mountain like one of its own goats, and before the sun was up, the thread had brought him indeed to his mother's door. There it vanished from his fingers, and he could not find it, search as he might. The door was on the latch, and he entered. There sat his mother by the fire, and in her arms lay the princess fast asleep.
"Hush, Gertie,"
said his mother.
"Do not wake her. Oh, I'm so glad you're come. I thought the cobs must have got you again."
With a heart full of delight, Curdie sat down at a corner of the hearth, on a stool opposite his mother's chair, and gazed at the princess, who slept as peacefully as if she had been in her own bed. All at once, she opened her eyes and fixed them on him.
"Oh, Curdie, you're come,"
she said quietly.
"I thought you would."
Curdie rose and stood before her with downcast eyes.
"Irene,"
he said,
"I am very sorry I did not believe you."
"Oh, never mind, Curdie,"
answered the princess.
"You couldn't, you know. You do believe me now, don't you?"
"I can't help it now. I ought to have helped it before."
"Why can't you help it now?"
"Because, just as I was going into the mountain to look for you, I got hold of your thread, and it brought me here."
"Then you've come from my house, have you?"
"Yes, I have.
"I didn't know you were there."
I've been there 2 or 3 days, I believe."
"And I never knew it. Then perhaps you can tell me why my grandmother has brought me here. I can't think. Something woke me. I didn't know what, but I was frightened, and I felt for the thread, and there it was. I was more frightened still when it brought me out on the mountain, for I thought it was going to take me into it again, and I like the outside of it best. I supposed you were in trouble again, and I had to get you out, but it brought me here instead. Oh, Curdie, your mother has been so kind to me, just like my own grandmother."
Here Curdie's mother gave the princess a hug, and the princess turned and gave her a sweet smile and held up her mouth to kiss her.
"Then you didn't see the cobs?"
asked Curdie.
"No, I haven't been into the mountain. I told you, Curdie."
But the cobs have been into your house, all over it, and into your bedroom, making such a row."
"What did they want there? It was very rude of them."
"They wanted you to carry you off into the mountain with them for a wife for their Prince Hairlip."
"Oh, how dreadful!"
cried the princess, shuddering.
"But you needn't be afraid, you know. Your grandmother takes care of you."
"Ah, you do believe in my grandmother, then? I'm so glad. She made me think you would someday."
All at once, Curdie remembered his dream and was silent, thinking.
"But how did you come to be in my house and me not know it?"
asked the princess. Then Curdie had to explain everything. How he had watched for her sake, how he had been wounded and shut up by the soldiers, how he heard the noises and could not rise, and how the beautiful old lady had come to him, and all that followed.
"Poor Curdie, to lie there hurt and ill, and me never to know it!"
exclaimed the princess, stroking his rough hand.
"I would not have hesitated to come and nurse you if they had told me."
"I didn't see you were lame,"
said his mother. Lame in this context means hurt.
"Am I, Mother? Oh, yes, I suppose I ought to be. I declare I've never thought of it since I got up to go down amongst the cobs." "Let me see the wound,"
said his mother. He pulled down his stocking, when, behold, except a great scar, his leg was perfectly sound. Curdie and his mother gazed in each other's eyes, full of wonder. But Irene called out,
"I thought so, Curdie. I was sure it wasn't a dream. I was sure my grandmother had been to see you. Don't you smell the roses? It was my grandmother healed your leg and sent you to help me."
"No, Princess Irene," said Curdie. "I wasn't good enough to be allowed to help you. I didn't believe you. Your grandmother took care of you without me.
She sent you to help my people anyhow. I wish my King Papa would come. I do want so to tell him how good you have been.
But, said the mother,
We are forgetting how frightened your people must be. You must take the princess home at once, Curdie, or at least go and tell them where she is.
Yes, Mother. Only I'm dreadfully hungry. Do let me have some breakfast first. They ought to have listened to me, and then they wouldn't have been taken by surprise as they were.
That is true, Curdie, but it is not for you to blame them much. You remember?
Yes, Mother, I do. Only I must really have something to eat.
You shall, my boy, as fast as I can get it,
said his mother, rising and setting the princess on her chair. But before his breakfast was ready, Curdie jumped up so suddenly as to startle both his companions.
Mother, Mother!
He cried.
Huh? I was forgetting! You must take the princess home yourself. I must go and wake my father.
Without a word of explanation, he rushed to the place where his father was sleeping. Having thoroughly roused him with what he told him, he darted out of the cottage. And there is chapter 28. Don't you see, Rolfie? Little Princess Irene was safe and sound with Curdie's mama.
Woo! Yeah! I was pretty scared there for a second, but I feel much better now. Is it over?
Well, no, not yet, Rolfie. There's still plenty of stuff to wrap up.
Oh, yeah? Like what?
Well, I'm sure that the old lady is going to make another appearance. And I also think Irene's father, the king, might make an appearance as well.
Oh, yeah! They still got stuff to wrap up.
Indeed we do, Rolfie. There are 4 more chapters left in this beautiful book, and I think we will be able to fit all of them into the next episode.
So just one more episode?
Yep, just one more after this, buddy.
And then we're all done?
Well, for now, Rolfie, I do think there might be some more stories in our future.
You think so, really?
Oh, I know so, buddy, I know so. Well, peasants, thank you all for joining us tonight. We will wrap up The Princess and the Goblin in the next episode. Sleep well tonight.
Good night! See you later!